There you go. So we want to look at some of the commonalities and some of the solutions that were suggested or came out of the comments and the findings that were there. It isn't everything, but there's some overlap that if you've been in more than one meeting, you'll pick up right away. But I do want to get your feedback, your suggestions, your questions, your comments, even wording. I didn't spend a lot of time wordsmithing because I knew you all are you're very smart people who are very involved, and you will have suggestions there. So we're really gonna go there. We're gonna spend, a couple seconds. I want to make sure everybody is updated. This was the slide we started with. Magellan is finishing up their work to produce a report. They had hoped by today, but I haven't seen it, so they promised by next week. We are wrapping up the community outreach process. It went even better than we thought it would. While I keep talking about numbers in the 2,700 to 3,000, they're really touch points because, as you saw, some people didn't fill out the whole survey, but we really did get a lot of information on our surveys, even if it was just, there you go, my office mates, even if it was just partial information. About it is, we had these focus groups and surveys. We also did interviews, and then we had meetings where we presented, and I would do polling a lot of times in those meetings to get feedback. So it really did drive the numbers, and it drove the comments that we got from all over. And so what we've been doing for each community is looking at those comments and trying to sort them, identify where the comments or the data and the charts showed needs. We've sorted those for each of the groups, come up with some needs statement. Sorry, they would be noisy now, and headings. And the headings really are just the short statements. So that's how the process has gone so far. Now we're at the point of taking the need statements from residents and government and the other 4 work groups, and we'll be pulling those together into a draft needs assessment document. Okay, today is just one of those days. And we'll be looking for commonalities and synergies, and having done or been in all of these meetings, I can already see some of them really glaring. But that document will be similar to what you're going to see today. It'll still be the presentation format, the skeleton. It'll still focus more on needs and high level ideas around solutions. It won't go into very targeted solutions at this point, because we're still looking really at the needs and the input from the communities. I mentioned that Magellan is going to be bringing forward their report. And so to look at these, we've scheduled 2 meetings, and hopefully you've gotten information and meeting requests for each of those. First is June 10th, next Thursday, to look at the combined report in this format. And you will get that report plus each of the individual reports and much of what I'm calling appendices, charts and things that came from them. My goal is to have that out to everyone by Tuesday, certainly no later than Wednesday, but the draft reports that everyone has seen will be easy. Some of the charts and things, as we pull those, may be a little more difficult. But we're going to provide that level of information. You are welcome to comb through it for the 6 communities. The presentations look a lot like what you're going to see today. Then we'll have Magellan's draft report. They are scheduled to provide an overview of it and answer questions on June 24th. I have asked that the Executive Steering Committee and the ICT and Internet Communications Technology work groups be there for sure. But obviously the residents group has been so active. I hope that you will be able to join. Both today's meeting and that meeting, the June 10th meeting too, will be recorded. We will have the presentations and we will have minutes. Nina is here today taking minutes, and you all know it's being recorded, so that all of it's out there for people who aren't able to attend. That input, the needs assessment draft and the infrastructure, will come together along with other data, findings, reports, input, and survey results that we've gotten from other places to really help do the draft of the strategic plan. We're still looking at that draft happening toward the end of this month and in July, with a target of having the draft report in the end of July, early August at the latest, and then looking at August for when we present it for public comment. We have a community meeting, put it online, and the work groups, obviously, the steering committee, really get those comments back again, asking questions like we're asking today. Did we miss something? Did we not state it correctly? Do you know of something different? Are these really the needs and the priorities for the community? And then I'll be taking the strategic plan once we get that public input back. I'll be taking it to the Board of Supervisors, asking them to officially adopt it as the vision and roadmap for the county. I'll be encouraging the other government entities to do the same sort of adoption. I've already started talking to other organizations like, our MCOE, Marin County Office of Education, maybe Marin Economic Forum, other groups, even I could see our nonprofits and community-based organizations, adopting it somehow, with adopting being a pretty all-encompassing word. It could be anything from a statement of support to their board adopting the vision and the roadmap. We really need that continued collaboration to make this a community, a Marin plan instead of just a county of Marin plan. And so I am going to stop there and see if there's any quick questions or comments on the process and where we're headed. Okay. So some of you have heard this already, or at least read it, so thank you. I've just, like I said, continue to put numbers here. And the reason I do is I do understand it's really total touch points. When we go to get funding, it will be important to show community input. I'm hearing it more and more every time I listen to a webinar or participate in something around competing for funding, or even using the funding that we have. Some good news I've been hearing this week, if I haven't mentioned it to all of you, is that although the FCC says there's standards for served that are based on the provider's information, and other things they have that typically aren't provided by government, our own findings are what we can use to show that we're following the rules. For instance, for the American Rescue Plan funding that's already available to cities and counties, because we have to show we're using it the way it's intended, and the Treasury Department put out guidelines. So we can show it and say, yeah, the providers might say this area is served, but our speed test and our community input shows it's not. They will take our data now. That's a change. And so I think it's really important that we have all of this data we've collected, and it's already, even before the plan is done, it's going to be very useful for both justifying funds, and then there's some competitive funding that I think we can begin to go after as soon as it's open for competition.
Liza, could you please describe those 5 focus groups quickly?
It actually was focus groups and meetings. We had a focus group at, I'm going to try to remember them all because we had a focus group at Kruger Pines, which is a subsidized housing site, and they were for older adults and people with disabilities. We presented and did polling at Children for Change, which is 3rd through 8th graders and their sponsors. And so presented about Digital Marin, got their comments, and polled them on distance learning and just, their use of the internet. There were 3 presentations done, one to Aging Action, I'm probably saying it wrong, Aging Action Initiative Board of Directors. There was and that had input. There was polling done at the recent Commission on Aging Forum. And so we have those poll results where we asked about it. And there was another meeting with the older adult community. I didn't really include it. We also did a survey in all of Marin Housing Authority sites, and we had like 180 respondents. Some of those results were included yesterday in the education work group, but they also were had questions close to the resident survey. And so I can list all of those, but those are the ones that come to the top of my head.
Would it be useful, I mean, depending upon the future of this particular slide, to list those in the meeting?
You know, that's a really good point. Abby from Marin Promise Partnership did the analysis and report for education, and she did list them all.
Yes.
And I think that is a good,
Right.
it is a good comment, and we could certainly do that for each of the communities. Great comment. Nina's writing them down, because these are all, this doesn't say it here, but these are all drafts anyway, and we've got to finish them up.
And look at all the space.
I know. You're right. Okay, thank you. That's great question and input. These are those we called them needs names or whatever, but typically what I've done, we've just summarized quickly key findings or most significant needs, and I don't think these will be surprising, and we certainly can call them other things, but all of the input, and hopefully you saw this when you were doing it, really pointed to, this idea of digital equity. Certainly digital literacy has come up in every group. I was just comparing them to each other. This group also talked about privacy, security, and transparency. We did the healthcare community-based organization this morning. I think that's really important for that group too. And then if you look through the data on the resident survey, the online survey, safety was mentioned many, many times and is a concern. And I felt that it was mentioned enough, not only in that, but in other meetings, et cetera, that we want to make sure that one of our needs, our findings, is around safety of bridging the digital divide.
Just another, if I may insert an observation about that. Safety is a concern in, it seems a little on the benign side, the way it's phrased here. When I looked at the comments, safety was in, and I did because you helped me find them, that safety was combined with really the concept of electromagnetic safety is what emerged. Concern about emissions, concern about exposure, concern about 4G, 5G. There were people who are already electrosensitive. So, I mean, this could be a falling pole or something. So I just think that the concentration of comments in that arena could be reflected here.
Okay, good. And again, these are just quick little snippets. Why don't we move forward and look at each of those?
Okay.
Thank you. This idea that digital equity is a right came out of, again, the polls and the focus groups and other ways people did input. We now about the network does not cover the whole county, and our information from Magellan is really going to help us show that not only do we have but where there is connectivity and where there's not connectivity. One of the issues with digital divide, I think that we've seen is it's not just about the wires and the bringing internet to homes or multi-tenant dwellings, but it's really cost is a barrier. And the surveys that we did across the board, businesses and residents said that cost was the top barrier to having broadband. And so we need to make sure that we address that. And I think it's going to be a really tough issue or a really expensive issue, because if you think about what we're doing, like in Marin City, we're going to pay for Internet Essentials for 2 years. What happens after 2 years? And even if we have municipally provided broadband, there's a cost for the service. So there's got to be an investment to keep it no to low cost where that's needed. And it was interesting. One of the comments, I don't know if y'all saw it in the survey, the resident survey, one person said, I can pay for it and I'd be willing to pay more for people who can't afford it to have it. And that, I love that. I love that view, but also in my mind, I'm going, we've all paid a tax for it and it hasn't been used the way it needed to. Just moving on, resiliency certainly came up as an issue, not just here, but in the government emergency management group, in the need for multiple methods of communication. So we often think about fiber, but we need to think about radio and other ways to communicate, especially in disasters. And we need to think about resiliency, et cetera, for power outages and other things that happen. And so that came out of this survey and several others. And then just this idea of, broadband is infrastructure and broadband is a right, not a luxury. I don't know if you're following the current administration's $1 trillion infrastructure bill, but we have people in saying, well, don't include broadband, it's not infrastructure. And today it is. I mean, it's like electricity and water for communication. And so those things came out of surveys and conversations from residents in various ways. Okay, so I don't have a quote for this one, but I will tell you one that I probably should add. It was in person at Kruger Pines. An older gentleman was at the focus group, and I think if people just looked at him, they would say, well, what does he care about broadband? But he was very digitally literate, and one of the things he started to say was, I'm so glad, here are our needs. And then he stopped and he said, you know what? These aren't needs. This is a right. I have a right to this connectivity. And I was like, yes, go. So I think, I don't necessarily have a quote for this, but I know Bruce put some thoughts together around how we could address this, but I just want to see if we've kind of summed this up correctly. Okay, I'll keep moving. This is okay. This gets into that it's a right. And again, talking about, frankly, the digital divide. I already mentioned that cost and then lack of available services is the second top reason that people and businesses said they didn't have broadband. You can see I pulled some of the stats from the resident survey around, people believing their broadband is fast and reliable. The group that, said they couldn't pay any more than they are. And then one thing that we've got to balance and maybe dig more into is, with all of that said, almost 74% of respondents for the online survey and many of the respondents in the targeted survey said that, this ability to live, learn, and work is pretty good. And so I think for the online survey, it's because people were already online. For the business survey, I don't think it was quite this high. And then another finding that I just put on here was people still have landlines, and there's a big problem I think that we're going to face, and we're starting to face with the providers pulling out old copper lines and things. It leaves people with internet-based phones or cell phones. And there's growing concern among the public on what does that do. And so I put this here because I think it's something else that as Marin, as a community, we're going to have to try to address. And I do have a few quotes on this. I think you may have seen them or you saw them when you were looking, but this is definitely an equity issue too. And at least for the funding coming from at the federal level, we are being asked in many cases to tie our usage back to equity. And so I think it's really good that we see this, and we have the comments, and we have the data, we have the demographics through our FCC work to show it's an equity issue too. So any comments, feedback, questions about that need? I think we all knew this going in.
Something just struck me about people not having landlines. We could all go to cellular and then stick payphones on every corner.
I mean, really think about it. I was thinking, well, let's give everybody a radio, like
the
emergency
NOAA
people
radios.
carry.
Yeah.
Or little walkie-talkies. My son loves walkie-talkies, so we use them. And it's like, what do we do? Because people, I know for us, when we had landlines, we always had one of those old phones that didn't require electricity. It was in our earthquake kit. Because you just plug it in, you still can call. Now it's the internet or cellular, which are tied together. What do we do?
Yeah.
And I don't know that people realize that's happening to a great degree, and it is happening here in Marin, and it does mean that we need to do something. And I know our government emergency management group, they're not only worried where there's no coverage, they're very much worried about that, and where there's like single coverage or we can't really get fiber easily. What do we do? Because for them, it's the matter of life and death. Imagine you're on the receiving end and you need to evacuate. You can't. You don't get that message till somebody knocks on your door. So I do think it's something that sooner rather than later, as a community, as Marin, we're going to have to look at that. And it may be one of, Magellan has suggested that we really look at our public safety emergency response issues early first, because of the impact of it and the fact that we do have fires, we do have power outages, we do have other emergencies.
And they have many of the Firewise communities have been testing out the NOAA radios. That's good for receiving emergency notification, which is part of the problem, but it doesn't do anything for the getting a hold of your relative down the street or around the corner or in the next town where we're going to meet if we have to get out.
Yep, exactly. It is something that, Firewise has been doing a really great job, but there's so much. I mean, if there's I've had to shelter in place in my home because there was some, police thing going on, someone in the neighborhood or whatever, and they're knocking on doors. So definitely things have improved, but in some cases we could go backwards. And then there's some communities, period, that are just really unhappy because they don't have good cell service and they don't have internet service. So definitely it becomes a safety issue. And that's part of equity. We all deserve equitable safety response. I'm going to move on to the third one around digital literacy. And if you've been in any of the groups, this was already mentioned. And one of the findings overall is that we have lots of digital literacy programs out there. We've heard about them, people have written about them to us, but it's more like a patchwork quilt, and there are big patches missing. So we have gaps, we have overlaps too. And so perhaps, a low cost, no cost project right out the gate after we have our plan is to do an assessment or an inventory and try to figure out that. And this morning, we got a great suggestion about actually defining digital literacy so that we could bring Marin up to a baseline. And I think that's another really quick project that could help, the rising tide raising all boats. And one of the things that came out too is it's not just the literacy of our, the recipients or the consumers of digital, it's also the providers, the teachers, the nonprofit workers. We're really seeing that call for digital literacy training all over. I know that early on, or not early on, but during the process, you all have talked about digital navigators and other places to have resources easily, to find resources easily. And I think that's certainly a place where the literacy resources would make a lot of sense. Making digital literacy part of anything we do broadband. I would say from this time last year to this time now, I am much more enthusiastic about the fact that the funding is mentioning literacy as a way you can spend funds at the state and the federal level. So when we get funding, I'm confident we will, and we start to roll out more service or build, networks and extend them, we have the ability to include not just the service, but the equipment people use in their home and digital literacy. And so that's really exciting. Have people asking for ongoing training. And then this wasn't in the resident survey, but this was in a survey of community-based organizations. You can see how poorly they rated the digital literacy of their recipients. And so, even fair is less than neutral, good, or excellent. And so about 82%. So they have high concerns about it as they offer online services, and many of them can plan to continue that. And so I just put a couple of 3 comments up here around this idea of digital literacy that really show, the spectrum from I know it, but I know I'm going to get behind to, internet. It's not just internet access. The bottleneck is really the skills. So any thoughts, questions, comments about the digital literacy piece?
I have some in general. So I personally keep getting pulled between 30,000 feet and the ground floor. And I'm trying to sort of like wrap my head around where we actually are. And it seems as though we're going to end up, I'm hoping we're going to end up with like a matrix of need, so that we can prioritize within that matrix the things that are really possible to deal with and accomplish and invest in, and those things that are going to be almost impossible. You can't stop, the FCC won't let you stop, anybody stop AT&T from pulling the copper out or just decommissioning it. So landlines are going away. So how much time and effort do we want to spend there, at least on that issue, right? Now, the idea that we have to replace it with something is good, but there are going to be some areas that we're going to not be able to make any particular progress. And so I probably won't have a good sense of where this project has gone until I see the work that the groups are doing, and the needs assessment is matched up with what Magellan has said are possibilities, because it seems as though they're the only ones at this point in time who are going to be able to deliver a concrete vision, right? Some aspect of a concrete vision of what counties can do realistically with the funding available and the starting points and whatnot. If you look at the resident survey is really, it's reflecting the general wealth and opportunity and availability of internet resources, either access or literacy, or just the people are just overeducated, so they have access to the internet in general. I'm just speaking in general now, but as far as the survey is concerned, they were super highly educated. It looks like they were older, retired. They can pay for a phone and home access. They're paying about what everybody in the nation is paying on a monthly basis, $70. They're happy with the service, and they grouse a little bit about the price, but it's not going to stop them from investing more if they have to. Comcast can raise its prices 3% and they won't budge. So what I don't have any is right now, I don't see any granular information about the people who are not being represented in this survey. And those are the people in the canal and all the other people that I've mentioned in some of my correspondence, is to say, we have people who don't have access. We know who kind of can figure out who they are, where they are. So I want to see us match up programs that take advantage of things that are available right now. Like, for instance, the Comcast Internet Essentials program is available. We can, in my opinion, we could probably put that at a help desk at Health and Human Services and see if there's anybody inside that telehealth system or that social service system that could receive internet as just another service. And you have to fund it. You can fund it for a couple of years, 2-3 years, like we're doing in Marin City. It gives you a chance to develop programs around it, because you have to develop the digital literacy programs around something specific for the people who need it most. And so you see a lot of the counties, cities, towns, they're taking their libraries and putting them front and center. They're putting digital literacy into the training, into the library. They are the digital navigators, and then putting a nonprofit around that, like we see with the Marin Promise Partnership, which is wrapped around the school goals, outside of the school system, but nonetheless. So anyway, I'll just finish by saying I can't wait to see what Magellan delivers, because when I've read their other reports, they can be very specific about what investments could be made in infrastructure, middle mile infrastructure and whatnot, to bring along a municipal network. Actually, I think I'll just finish by saying I had sort of spent quite a bit of time rummaging around in the E-rate system, Federal's E-rate system, and I discovered that you can actually download all of the applications for any school district. And I ran into one for Petaluma, and I said, "Oh, what's this?" So Petaluma, like the Nevada Unified School District, petitioned the federal government for E-rate funds to put in dark fiber. Got the award, and so they worked with Sonic. The school system worked with Sonic to install that fiber. Sonic then found it probably because AT&T didn't go into Petaluma to invest in their AT&T fiber. Sonic probably felt comfortable investing their own capital in West Marin, inside the neighborhoods. And then the local government said, "Oh, why don't we just get off of Comcast business services and also install a dark fiber with Sonic between all of our government buildings?" So now they're kind of did a one step after another to build out a municipal dark fiber INET, but they started it with federal money. So we have some models now to follow. I'm anxious to see what Magellan brings forward.
And you're exactly right, Bruce. Magellan will be bringing forward conceptual network design and recommendations about phasing in build out and some ways that we can get it done, and governance and ongoing business models, so that the plan turns into operational, both from potentially municipally owned, managed network to a nonprofit in the funding, grant, philanthropic areas. And so they will be doing that. They won't necessarily be bringing forward recommendations on programs that get at all these other things that we're talking about. I appreciate the idea of matrix, because I've not communicated that, but I see it in my head of, we had already talked about short term, long term, but often when we look at projects, just what is the effort involved? What are the risks involved? And what are other things, and prioritizing based on that. And I think you're exactly right. There are things that are possible, there are things that are impossible. There are ways to get at it that might not be so direct. And so you are exactly right on all these points. As we start to put this information together, we will be able to, between what we have and what Magellan has, to start fill out that kind of matrix. And that's where we're wanting the plan to go with. There's certainly long-term investments and plans and projects that we need to scope better. And then there's short-term and potentially some of those things I call low cost, no cost, that will come out of this, that we can, get a group together and get those moving while we're deploying more fiber and internet infrastructure. Okay, let's see. We did that. This was another area, and security came up in other groups, and certainly privacy in the healthcare CBO group. I didn't spend a lot of time writing these statements either, but I do think that there's some points that were made in comments in our survey and others around, not funneling, not changing, not directing what's contents out there, basically the net neutrality, which goes back and forth in and out of requirements. Privacy, we do have privacy legislation. California does a lot on that, but I don't believe that, if you think about Marin as a community, as people are totally educated about it, and those providing services and content don't necessarily want us to be. So maybe part of that information navigation area would do some education on that.
Fine.
Then we've got, we talked about this in the education group or the healthcare group too. We put up a lot of things online quickly as temporary solutions, but as they become permanent solutions, there's government policies and regulations, there's other federal ones that we need to make sure we need to advocate or support updates so that they apply better to our online services. And then I mentioned this morning that through the another report done by the Marin County Civil Grand Jury around security and cybersecurity or information security suggested that the county share with cities and towns, and that has already started. They're having meetings and sharing information. In some cases, we're able to share resources and training. We have some groups coming in that aren't cities and towns, like Marin Municipal Water District is now part of it. Canal Alliance joined, and just this idea of people having concerns around cybersecurity, but also agencies saying, maybe on the government side, we're not big enough to really have this, and in nonprofits being worried about it. It's just maybe there's a way to again try to establish a baseline through Marin-wide Cybersecurity Council. I just made up a name. So let's see I have a couple of comments here or quotes from people who responded, but thoughts on this idea of trust and privacy, security, and transparency, meaning the data that's available.
You can listen to that. This is the Deerfield Marin meeting. I've already told them.
You have to do it.
No.
Okay, so somebody's okay. Sorry, Greg. Did you want to add something?
No, I'm sorry. I should have been muted.
Okay, it's fine. It's fine. Happens all the time. So I'll just keep going in our interest of time. The last one is safety is concerned. I believe Vicki, you already had some comments around this, and this came up even in the business responses to the business survey, and we talked about ways to frame this better. But just the idea around some balance of this. I think those of you who were in the first meeting with Magellan, when they started talking about the conceptual network and their initial report, that there is both, there's a place obviously for fiber, but there's also could be a place where some sort of wireless, et cetera, may have to be used just because of geography, cost, et cetera. So that's where the balance came from. Again, I just put this up here because I thought we could talk about it. Vicki, you do see it says RF exposure regulations. That is one of the issues I think that people have is the FCC hasn't, needs to review this, update it. We need to have more control of our local public right of way. There are just things that are being talked about across California, but also across the country when these kinds of issues come up. I did pull one particular quote from the many comments that were made that really did point it out, and that's where I got the word safe from. So I'll stop talking and just comments, thoughts, ways to express this better, ideas, etc.
I'll make one comment. At some point, I think I saw it in the government group. The comment was made that Marin County will fall behind if it does not have, and just not adopt 5G and make it easier for AT&T and Verizon to bring those technologies. I just think that's I'm just going to say it, I think that's a dangerous concept. That when we're looking at our county and we're looking at communications and we're looking at modern technologies, we have to ask ourselves whether it's appropriate for here. How is it going to help us? And if the carriers, if AT&T and Verizon aren't willing to come forward and say, this is what I have, this is where I'm going to put it, this is how you're going to benefit. If they're not going to give us a plan, and I doubt they ever will, then we have no reason to believe that it's going to solve any problem that we might identify just by automatically assuming that somehow automatically 5G means that the people back in Sleepy Hollow will suddenly have good cell service, right? We have to be very careful about that, without just assuming that the Internet of All Things and 5G are going to solve real problems that we identify through projects like this.
So true, Bruce. Thank you.
Yes, but I do think that our government, and more specifically the emergency responders, have fairly strong opinions about getting people connected, and it might not be that 5G is the answer, but the fact that getting fiber everywhere, it wouldn't happen fast enough for their desire to be able to communicate to residents, to each other, etc. So I think that's where you saw that. We will be going back through all of this, and so I appreciate you pointing that out. But I think as the group that they talk to, that is they feel their need, and maybe we're answering it and shouldn't answer it and just write it as a need. Their need is ubiquitous communication and multiple sources, and they're understanding that wireless or fixed wireless is one way to do that.
Right. Well, again, I'm hoping that Magellan brings forward, because they've also mentioned that you're going to have to put other technologies along with fiber, the most appropriate. That as they bring those things forward, they qualify them, just like I qualified 5G in this particular case, that it's appropriate for you. This kind of this application of 5G be appropriate for your county, different than San Jose or Sacramento or something like that. So I think we have to get hyper local in terms of our understanding of what the next 15, 20 years means for a county like Marin. We're different than other counties in the sense our growth is different. Our population is different. That's why I'm saying, if we're looking at this matrix of need, every time I hear a new statistics, like 30% of our population will be over the age of 60 by 2030 or something like that. I mean, that's just a whole gigantic problem that's coming at us, right? What can we do today with the technologies that are available and the ones we can invest in to sort of help manage to keep people in their homes, or to really make sure they get telehealth in their homes in a way that reflects the enormous margins that are going to happen in the healthcare system as telehealth gains 30, 40, 50% market share in terms of patient visits and whatnot. So anyway, there you go.
May I ask a quick question?
I appreciate saying that.
Excuse me. About the
No, I was just saying, yes, Bruce.
Sorry. The third bullet point, may I just ask, advocate with whom?
Well, advocate with, usually it is for us, federal government. And we have already done this. I don't know if you recall when the FCC changed some of the requirements or made it easier for providers to put things in the public right away, and took some of local governments, which is already minimal rights to it, away. Marin joined some other counties and filed a lawsuit to turn that around, and my understanding is it's still pending. And so we could say advocate with whoever, but this idea of increasing our rights and also not losing more rights, because the telecommunication companies have not stopped lobbying themselves. And so I think Marin, this is really a statement of Marin as a whole, continuing to push for local control of our public right of way.
And of course, we're aware that there are several, not just one, like in 2017, bills in the state legislature in the pipeline right now that further erode local control. And our own Mark Levine voted for one of them, for example. So that's prompted my advocate with whom question.
Okay. No, good point. And you know, I'm thinking in my head holistically versus advocate with the FCC over the RF exposure regulations, because they're the ones that set that, and locally we're not able to go beyond what they say, you know, what the FCC has set out.
Right, but we're seeing the industry by legislators, by legislation anyway, that further erodes beyond the FCC, what the FCC has already done historically. So it might be worthwhile to just specify, advocate with the FCC, advocate with state legislature, whatever makes sense.
Yes,
That's right.
and I think this gets at another, to me, low cost, no cost project that should come out of this is just advocacy, period. The county has a lobbyist, and we sign on to a lot of things, and we write letters, and I showed you all where to find them. But imagine if it was the county and every city and every town, and then, you know, education and all of us that in this collaboration now that does it, and then residents. It only takes a few letters, frankly, to our elected officials. You know, I've seen in my 30-something career in government, there are times policies have changed, especially at the local level, through phone calls and letters. And so I think that and some groups know that and use it here, you know, attendance at meetings, et cetera. And I think that, you know, for digital equity, safety, all these things, I think it's something that we could do collaboratively and have even a stronger voice than individually.
As those letters and calls sure didn't reach Mark Levine in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, we won't always be successful, but I do feel this idea of local control is very, very important.
It's paramount. You know, with fire risk, for example, the local community, it's a local government, and with public input that needs to understand the fire prone communities and where things should and shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Well,
definitely. That's why. No, I'm right there with you about local control. And I was just going to finish that thought with, when I say advocate and I say local control, I'm not saying just local government. And I you know, because we manage the right of way, but overall it is local control, and that is government in all our sectors and our residents. Bruce, you had a comment?
This phrase is perfect, increasing local government's rights regarding regulation and use of public rights of way. It's just the advocate with whom that I feel could be more specific. Okay, I really am going to be quiet now for a little while.
You don't have to. So let me ask, to go to the end game for at least the Digital Marin project before we go into implementation phase. We are going, this project is going to be establishing a governance structure, if not a governance group. Is that true? Liza?
Sorry, I realized I was muted. I'm shaking my head and talking.
Okay.
Magellan is going to recommend a operating model and governance as part of their recommendations, and they floated some ideas, and I really believe at this point what they're gonna do a few ideas or recommendations and the pros and cons. But what they've talked about a lot, and it took me a while to move in this direction, is that we create an entity, whether it's a special district or co-op or whatever, but an entity that takes the digital Marin plan and then moves it into implementation and make sure that it continues to live and the projects are done, and we get funding, et cetera. And that part of that, or separately, there be a nonprofit that really looks at grants and other things to raise money and do a lot of the things that aren't typically the direct implementation of infrastructure. And so they'll be doing that, and then they're not going to get it, I think, in as much as governance in advisory committees and those things. I did see what you wrote, Bruce, and I do think that that's what we need to put in the plan and come out of it, what works best for Marin. And we're really good at special districts or JPAs and things. This project, I think, shows participation from a lot of voices. I think all of that we need to consider and put in this plan. It's something we want to do. So we fully believe that it'll be in the plan, and Magellan is going to provide us recommendations based on what they've seen and what they have learned about Marin.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm just trying to look for a bucket into which something like this advocate for. That means, and you mentioned lobbyists that we already have, and processes that are already in place. That we are going to bring those together under some umbrella of action, an action umbrella. Once this project is, so that's, and my only advocacy is that I'm just, we stated it from the beginning, at least in the residents group, that we're trying to build an infrastructure of people, as well as just physical infrastructure and solutions. And so with as many people at the resident level who have participated in this project, I think that there would be a few anyway, who are willing to put in the time and have the technical education primarily, to be able to be so we end up with executing on what the civil grand jury had recommended, which is that there is a legitimate citizens advocacy group of some kind identified as such in a governing structure. So that's good. Just like the fire district or the MWPA, just kind of exactly, that's a good model.
I agree with you, and I was listening to a board meeting, I think a few weeks ago, and they were talking about I think the fire district that was created, and just at LAFCO itself, which I think is local area. Anyway, you all probably know what LAFCO the acronym is, but just this idea of they have to approve, new JPAs and those kinds of things. But LAFCO's actually really happy with what Marin just did and has done in terms of creating them and running them and having them perform the way they should, which is good news, because one of the things that Magellan was a little hesitant about is that there are so many special districts and JPAs already. So that was good news to me. It didn't have anything to do with digital Marin. It was really just talking about that, there's it's positive here in Marin. And I think that's good for us. And I think all of us, like you said, Bruce, came into this with the idea that there should be resident oversight. And I think when we talk about residents, I would love it to be cross-sector, because we've had such participation from all sectors.
Right. Well, that's what they did in the Petaluma. They have had a technical advisory committee. It's been in place for, I think, 11 years or so, right? And you can see them go through their history of time saying, do we really serve a purpose? And sometimes they believe they do, and sometimes they believe they don't, which is typical of advisory groups like that. People come and go, skills change. But in the end, the only reason I could find out anything about what actually happened in Petaluma in terms of the developments of with Sonic and fiber and those things I mentioned before was because of that committee, because it meets with the not the town manager, but the I guess that would be the CIO of Petaluma. So those meetings were invaluable for me as a resident to understand how things developed there. So I highly advocate that we have a public entity that is able to ask questions and do inquiry. So
you're not going to get any pushback from me. Yeah. Yeah, and we could think through a name, and we have a few months. And I will say though, having the philanthropic arm and the operating arm, I think those are both important because we have people who are very interested in the physical infrastructure, getting it out there. And then we have groups that have been very interested in the devices and the accessibility and the literacy. And I think that understanding both of those pieces and letting Marin do it is important. I will tell you personally why I struggled a little bit in discussions with Magellan was when the county started this project, I had hoped, but I really didn't see this level of involvement and then something bigger growing out of it. I knew we needed a plan, but I think Magellan, when they saw what was going on and what they've helped happen in other places, really realized that Marin is a good place to have it be an operational entity. I know they're going to recommend that we do some municipal fiber, whether it's mostly backhaul and middle mile. And I think they're going to recommend things that just make sense with Marin. I'm with you, Bruce. I'm excited to see what their report's going to say. Well, I stopped sharing. I appreciate all the input. I want to be sensitive of time. Any last thoughts for the summary of the needs other than what Nina and I've documented? All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Greg, who's probably been to 3 of these, and Vicki, 2 in a day, or 2 in 2 days. And Bruce, it's so good to see your face. We'll get more information out to you, and I sure hope you can be there on the 10th. I think you're going to get a better idea of the fuller picture. I've been at all of these, so I've gotten more of the picture. But once you see all this, I think it'll be really helpful. All right. You'll have a great afternoon and a really terrific weekend.
See everybody. Good to see everybody.
Bye.
Bye.